It's been a wild past week. We took off last Wednesday, starting on Wednesday for Thanksgiving. I hope you all had a good time with your family. And over this time period, there's a lot of news. Riots erupting in Dublin, which many of you may have heard about, but there are many developments. Conor McGregor is being criminally investigated for his criticisms of the policies in Ireland that led to a stabbing of several children that some media outlets are calling the nursery stabbing. It's pretty wild to see this happening. At the same time, you have France on the tipping point. Once again, as there is a story about people screaming they were going to stab white people. There's a girl in critical condition and the government is saying, please, please, everyone remain calm. In Ireland, I believe it's in Ireland, it's a lot going on. They've got riot trucks, water cannons prepared for the angry citizens. And what is the media saying? The far right. Tommy Robinson got arrested in the UK for simply being in London, where a protest was taking place. Or I shouldn't say protest, a rally against anti-Semitism. The video's wild. And Geert Wilders, like the Trump of Netherlands, I guess they call him, wins. Something interesting is happening. And there's a lot of sentiment from individuals that were shunned and shut out maybe only 6-7 years ago. You have the indigenous population of Europe quite outraged over the failures of immigration, the increasing crime, and it's starting to become more and more prominent. That is to say, the white natives of these countries are starting to express political shock and disdain to the point where there are riots. Now, I don't think it's fair to say, they try coming out in the media saying these are far right looting and riots. And some of these videos showing looting, they're not locals, okay? They're not natives. But let me make this point. You're not going to play this game with me, leftists, all right? They in the United States talk about indigenous rights and oppressed versus oppressor. Look, in Europe, in Ireland, the Irish are the indigenous. I don't know how long a people has to be in a country before they're the indigenous people, because, of course, people move around all the time. But that's the argument, right? But for some reason, the modern left in the United States doesn't extend the same sentiment to the indigenous of Europe when they are concerned about large groups moving in and colonizing. It's funny how that works. It would seem that the real issue with wokeness is simply just they don't like white people. And that's always been the case. When we see people say, oh, we're for, ending racism. And then what does the left do in the United States? They create white and non-white meeting groups. Dearborn, Michigan has people of color and non-people of color digital meetings. I think it was in Seattle, they have a library saying, this space is for people of color only, and this is for non-people of color, basically segregating the races. I think the reality is most people on the left are just racist, and they are using people's concerns and genuine sympathies and people's genuine resentment of real racism against them so that they can be racist. But we've got a lot to break down. The main point here is the media is reporting that the quote unquote hard right has started winning across Europe. Let me tell you a story. This past holiday week, I was hanging out with some friends, and one of these individuals, a friend of a friend, happened to be from the Netherlands. And there were two big issues that this individual, who was fairly lefty, I'd say, moderate in many ways, but like moderate left-leaning. This woman told me that immigration is causing everyone to go right. They're pissed about it. Even as someone who is kind of lefty, saying these people are coming from outside the country, they're being given benefits and we're working and people are tired of it. And this person also told me, as an LGBT person themselves, that many people in the Netherlands in Holland are sick of LGBT stuff being everywhere and they're just done with it. And I thought that was interesting. This person's kind of left-leaning. I wouldn't say perhaps by European standards, but I suppose in America, we'd call that fairly moderate. I think people need to understand this. Europe is not as far left as the American left makes it out to be. There are certainly far left elements. There are certainly pro-immigration elements. There's certainly wokeness. No, I'm not saying they're not. But it's interesting. If you take a look at the issue of, say, abortion, most countries in Europe, I think the abortion is banned after 16 weeks or something like that. I think it's 16 weeks in Holland. I'm not sure. In the United States, you've got states saying up until the point of birth. And when I mentioned this to this young Dutch woman, she's like, that's crazy. Why would you do that? Nobody would do that. And I'm like, well, in the United States, they certainly are. And she's like, man, like, what's wrong with you guys? But here's what's happening. A tipping point for France. But it's a tipping point for Europe. The people who are there, who are from there, are getting fed up, and you can see it. And I'll show you how. There's a video I saw over this past week, and it is a person asking the people of, I believe it's Galway, Ireland, what do you think the most popular name in this town is as of 2022? The most popular boy's name for 2022. And all these guys are like, oh, in Ireland, Jack, Richard. Women are like, John? And then one guy goes, it's probably Muhammad. And then the interviewer's like, you are correct. And then what? And then one by one, people are like, what? Muhammad? Now, look, man, I don't care what you name your kids. But what's happening now is, people like their stories. People like their history. They like their traditions. We as human beings strive to eliminate the bad and keep the good and iterate until we get things better. That's what we do. But this means that there are certain things in terms of traditions and morality that we retain because they have been successful. That's why when I'm having that conversation with Stephen Marsh, he says, morality doesn't matter to me. And I'm like, listen, morality is a component of we did something that worked. We will keep doing it until it doesn't. And that's not always a good thing. But it means that parents are saying things like, hey, I don't want my kids exposed to these things. I like the values we have. Maybe it's going to church in this place or whatever it may be, because it led to the success we see today. Now, what's fascinating is we've got bank branches closing. We've got economic recession. We've got war. Things seem to be worse than they've ever been. And at the same time, we have people abandoning tradition. Now, in reality, I think a lot of tradition is bad. A lot of it. I don't know if I can say most or all, or certainly not all. But a lot of tradition is good. And what happens now is you have the far left eliminating it for the sake of progress, regardless of whether or not progress is good or bad. Let's start with this story, and we'll break down. We'll give you this recap a little bit. I know a lot of you probably already know this story about the riots in Dublin, but for those that don't, I'm assuming you do, because this is a week ago this story comes out. We have this. 3 young children were among 5 people injured in a knife attack in Dublin on Thursday that sparked riots in the city center, and which people have not yet ruled out any motive over, including whether it could be terror-related. It seems to have been. Public transport was suspended, and patients advised not to travel to a nearby maternity hospital unless absolutely necessary after clashes between riot police and anti-immigrant protesters who arrived at the scene of the attack beside the main thoroughfare of O'Connell Street. Now, here we go, baby. Conor McGregor speaks out. This is the update. These are the updates we're getting. This is, again, last week. We got a lot to cover. Irish police investigate Conor McGregor over riot tweets. MMA star tweeted he did not condone violence and told his nation's government to ensure Ireland's safety, or I will. This is the game they play. You get a terror attack, a stabbing, children killed, riots. Why? Because people are pissed off. Conor McGregor is furious, and he calls them out. Why? The riots are the problem. Nobody wants to live in riots. Riots happen for a variety of reasons. Conor McGregor speaking out is because of the riots. He does not want the riots. He wants peace. He does not want the violence. See, that's the point. And then what they do is they say, you're inciting. And they come after those who are challenging the failed system. They're trying to rewrite government. But how did the media respond? Oh boy, y'all are going to love this one. The Washington Post. Oh, I should add this too, but before I get into it, I want to show this. The Washington Post, Dutch election shows far right rising and reshaping Europe. I had this here for a reason. Geert Wilders winning, showing you the shift that's happening. But here's what the Washington Post had to say. Online rumors claimed the perpetrator of a stabbing attack was an immigrant. The BBC found that the man was an Irish citizen who had lived in the country for 20 years. Police blamed a lunatic faction driven by a far-right ideology for the riot in Dublin. Here's another story by the Washington Post. Far-right protesters burn and loot in Dublin in worst violence in decades. It may be the same story, to be completely honest. And they say this in the first paragraph. Right-wing protesters, angered by a stabbing attack they believed had involved someone of immigrant background, rampaged through central Dublin on Thursday night, leaving behind a trail of burning destruction. Interesting. They believed. Here's my favorite part. Community Notes, getting this one right on Twitter, on X. The man is indeed an immigrant. He was originally from Algeria. The Washington Post segment appears to conflate citizenship with not being an immigrant, and you can be both. Fascinating. The guy was an immigrant. He stabbed children. People are angry because, get this, the man was supposed to be deported some 20 years ago. They didn't deport him. They let him stick around. Herman Kelly, those poor children in Parnell Square would be playing with their toys today if the suspected Algerian stabber was deported as ordered 20 years ago. Puts in focus legal aid to non-citizens for endless appeals. Irish Freedom Party solution. If you're illegally, deport immediately. Take a look at this. The Sunday Times has learned that the man, originally from Algeria and in his 50s, was arrested in 2003. He was due to be deported 20 years ago, but fought the order for 5 years and eventually obtained an Irish passport. He is a naturalized Irish citizen, originally from Algeria. So here's a man who was an immigrant. People are upset about it. You know, I said this several years ago. I said in a variety of ways that the rising conflict, it can't be ignored. My fear was that if here's how I phrased it. The white majority of these countries and the United States can only tolerate so much until they feel legitimately threatened, and then you will be crushed. I am not saying it's a good thing. I am not trying to support any of these fringe ideological fascist factions that want ethno-states. No, I'd rather detest this. And I will tell you, certainly there are various groups and various ideologies, and to argue that any ideology has nothing but bad ideas, look, man, we have to make sure we criticize and call out the bad, for which there are some groups where it's like 98% bad. Don't get me wrong. But if someone comes out and they're like, we want border security, but they happen to be like white ethno-nationalists, it's like, okay, well, we can throw out the white ethno-nationalist part and agree on the border security. I'll tell you my position first and foremost. As a person who comes from a mixed race family and, some of these obviously immigrated to the United States, yeah, I'm not a big fan of what these white nationalist groups have to offer because, my family, and this is my parents experienced this. You could not be married. You could not even live together if you were two different races until 1967. And even after that, you still had turmoil. Just because the Supreme Court said so didn't make it safe for you. Loving v. Virginia. Now, I can certainly understand why that's a great thing to have enshrined by the Supreme Court or ruled upon. But that is not to say that every idea presented by a group is bad. What I'm trying to say is, look, you have groups that will argue certain things, will agree on some, disagree heavily on others. But the point is this. I can certainly recognize the benefits of these rulings for my family, for me, and I think most of you would agree, yeah, we don't want to go back to that time. Even older people today that I talk to are like, that's kind of crazy. It's like if you're like an Asian guy and a white, woman, like you couldn't even share the same building together. I think that's nuts. I'm not a fan of that stuff for obvious reasons. But here's where we are now. What I fear is going to happen is in the United States, what do you see? The population of the country is majority white. And you have over and over again denunciations of just being white. Okay, well, that's obviously going to go in one direction. As the meme goes, it asks, there's a meme that asks, why are there so many alt-right white nationalist young men? And when I say so many, I mean, what is this, a few 100,000 active on the internet? Why is the sentiment growing? Why do some of these people have large followings? Why are we seeing these protest movements? Oh, it's really, really simple. You're an 18-year-old white man who started college. You're in debt. You're struggling. Your family maybe lost their house in the 2008 recession. I'm saying let's go back 10 years. And you go online. And what do you see? All these major newspapers saying whiteness bad, white people bad, white people, white people, white people. You go to college and the professor says, well, white people. I got a segment for you later today. Tim Dillon made a joke about the confidence of 24-year-old white men. And I'm just like, no, I know Tim Dillon's not particularly woke, but this line, this joke, I understand why people don't like some jokes. Now, I say this, you can joke about literally anything you want to me. We were having really funny jokes over the holiday, racial humor, whatever you want to call it. Everybody's making fun of each other, and we all laugh about it, have a good time. And it brings us together when, Seamus is Irish and I'm part Korean, and, we're making jokes at dinner and we're having a laugh about it. But I can understand when a joke is predicated upon a negative assumption about a group, I'm not saying you cry about it or cancel the comedian, but I think the underlying premises of these conversations could generate serious animosity. What I mean to say is, if you're a young white man who hears nothing from your universities that white people are bad, that, just insert bad things about white people, and then you go out and they're making fun of you for being white, you're going to generate resentment. The same is true for any race. While we can certainly make jokes about races, and I think that's like Dave Chappelle made a joke about Chinese people, there is something to be said for young white men who are struggling, many of suicide rates skyrocketing, lack of relationships, desperation, failure to launch. And what happens? They blame you for your race. Okay, so what happens? You go online, you find other people who are feeling negative because of this thing, and someone says, there's nothing wrong with you for being white. So what happens? They start building their own collective identity around this. And you will then end up with white nationalists. They're going to argue, as many white nationalists have, that if there are black identitarian groups, this is groups that base their politics off of their race, you will get the same thing for white people. And that actually used to be the norm. And it's been the norm for the world forever. Racial identity in government has always been the norm. In fact, in most countries, it still is. In China, in Japan, especially. Here in the United States, it's going to come back. In Europe, it's going to come back. Why? At a certain point, when you have children being stabbed, in more, a teen killing, look at this one. A teenage boy was killed at a dance party earlier this month. You had these individuals saying they wanted to stab white people. At a certain point, you're going to get white people being like, if you're attacking us, we are going to form collective blocks. I'm not a big fan of racial collectivism. The problem is most human beings in the world, some 90+% are. That's a reality. The American left, absolutely. No question. Probably the most racially collective group of people and ideology I've seen anywhere is the American woke left, where they want race to be everything. I'd prefer the classically liberal position of modernity, which is, it doesn't matter what your race is. That'd be preferable. Now we can have border security, we can have immigration and all of that stuff. And I'm a big fan. And if you want to come here, you come here legally. That's how you do it. And if you happen to be from Korea and you legally come to the United States and fill out your paperwork, or any other country, be it Italy or otherwise, and you find love here with anyone, that's fantastic. And what happens then is you will have a family, and your family will be whatever you want your family to be. And I'll tell you my problem with the woke left. It is not the American conservative movement that is advocating for segregation and attacking people based on race. It is the left. So what's happening now in Europe? The pendulum swings, baby. I got to be completely honest. I know that as a mixed race person, I can stand alongside all of these right-wing, whatever you want to call it, white protests, and I'll be totally fine. 100%. I know that if I go to the woke protests and they say all that matters is you're passing as white, they will try to put me into a position of submission. How do I know this? That's what Occupy Wall Street did. They say, you're not allowed to speak because you pass as a white male. The first thing they say is, you're a white male, you can't speak. And I say, actually, I come from a mixed race family, and, we face very serious discrimination and slavery and all that stuff. And they go, okay, well, you look white, so you can't talk. I've never experienced that at a conservative rally. And the funny thing is, even when I've gone and interviewed alt-right people, they've never said anything like that to me. They're just like, we want, borders and an indigenous population to be protected, blah, blah, blah. Again, not a fan of race-based policies. But this is where we're currently at. French government urges calm. The death of a 16-year-old named as Thomas has been seized upon by the far right, who portrayed the killing as symbolic of increasingly insecure conditions in French society. Right. And what are people saying? It's up to the judiciary to render justice, not for the French public themselves, he warned, Emmanuel Macron, while acknowledging the death of Thomas was the result of more than a simple fight at a village dance. Around 100 extreme right-wing. It's not working anymore. It's just not working anymore. You cannot just keep calling everybody far right. Because, my friends, Dutch elections shows far right rising and reshaping Europe. Oh, does it? Does it? Okay. When Austria 2 decades ago became the first nation in Western Europe to lurch to the far right since World War II, means nothing. One Belgian delegate skipped a lunch with the defense minister saying, I don't eat with fascists. Bye-bye. I got something to tell you. If the far right is winning elections, eventually that's the center. The idea of far right is predicated upon this. The majority of the population, or a plurality, is far right. That's an impossibility, statistically and mathematically. You know why? If majority of the population falls into one area, you would argue that the average person in this area is not far right, right? You see what I'm saying? If 80% of a country says we agree with these policies and the media goes, they're far right, what you're really saying is you are the outlier far left of them. What the media is telling you is across Europe, it's not the hard right or the far right. It's the moderate right. These people are not the most extreme right-wing ideology. This is not far right. A man who simply says secure our borders, end entitlements, and fix the immigration problem, those are moderate positions. The extreme position is round up the immigrants, every single one of them, deport them, ban all migration. Those are the extreme positions. The reality is, what they call far right is actually the average. Let me put it this way. If 100% of the population all believed in border security, you would not call that position far right. You'd call that position centrist because everyone agreed. It is the normal. It is the average. What does it mean to be right or left? Well, you can make arguments academically that right wing entails these policies and left wing entails these policies, but that doesn't mean anything. Why? Left economically could be socialist, right economically could be capitalist, or it could be cultural. When they're saying left and right, what they're saying is in opposition to us. If the majority or the plurality of a nation is in support of this ideology that is the average, by all means, you can say they're moving far right, and that's the argument, but I disagree completely. I think what this shows is in actuality, the media is far left, and the average person agrees with these views, meaning you can go farther right. Let me put it this way. Geert Wilder's not far right or hard right. That's so stupid. Hard right parties, they say. Relative to other parties, fine, I accept that. But again, if Geert Wilder's position is get a hold on immigration, it's not even that extreme. You want to talk about the extremist version of that? Okay, let's talk about the extremist version. First, you have a guy saying, we're going to build a wall, keep them out of this country. They can come legally. Okay, a legal immigration is not an extremist policy. If that is the position of the modern conservative and moderates and even many liberals, certainly not. It's not far right. What's the next step in that? You have someone coming out. We're gonna deport everybody, every single one. That's more extreme, right? At first, you're saying, look, if they're here, we'll work with them, but we're gonna cap off current illegal immigration. That's moderate. The next step is the conservative position of we are going to start arresting and deporting those who are here illegally. And that's not even necessarily conservative because many liberals would probably agree. It's actually probably just right-leaning moderate. The next one you have is we are going to investigate and challenge the immigration status of people who are here because perhaps they did not come legally and their paperwork is not correct. Now you're getting a little more, quote unquote, right on the issue. And I'm not saying there's any legitimate standard here. It's just a more extreme version of the immigration policy. And you know what the end result is? You want to talk about the real far right that the average person would not agree with is where you're saying all immigrants will be investigated. Then you say all immigrants will face deportation questions. They must now take their tests. Then you can go even further right and say, regardless of their status, immigrants will be given notices to vacate. Then all immigrants will be deported. Then we will forcibly remove immigrants from their homes. Then we will forcibly relocate immigrants into camps and holding centers. And finally, the most extreme and horrifying position. You want to talk about how far right you can get. None of that is legit. The fact is, Geert Wilders and Trump, ain't nobody's talking about rounding people up in their homes and loading them on trucks. That's the extremist, psychotic, and horrifying dystopian reality that they're trying to claim is happening now, but it's not. What's really happening is Trump saying, let's stop letting people in this country illegally. Okay. What's happening in Europe? I see this trend, man. It's really fascinating. We were hanging out with Danny Polishchuk, the comedian. He's fantastic. He's funny, hilarious guy. We were talking about, we had the Louis the 13th the $5,000 cognac. And it might be more than that now. I think they're going, inflation's nuts. And I was like, we cracked this open for the first time when Elon purchased X officially, Twitter. And Danny was like, it was really funny because as soon as Elon bought Twitter, everybody just went to men aren't women. And everybody left. Men aren't women. I was like, isn't it funny that you could be banned on Twitter for saying men are not women? It's a fact. Meghan Murphy, writer and feminist, tweeted, men aren't women though, and got permanently banned. That's how far left and psychotic the platform and social media was. A shift is happening. They claimed the people in Europe that were protesting over immigration and violence and crime, these enclaves that are forming, were white nationalists and far right. And some of them, yeah, of course. And what they'll do is they'll pick out the white nationalists and say, see, that's what you represent. Now what you're seeing is there are just people who live in Europe, in the Netherlands, who are like, dude, I just don't like the crime. Nobody's racist. Okay? Like I'm not saying literally nobody. I'm saying the average person is not racist. But I want to show you why this sentiment is popping up. Here's a video. Jack Posobiec tweeted it. Watch the reaction of people when they learn Mohammed is now the most popular boy's name in Galway, Ireland. Of course, Elon Musk responded to this, and there's some interesting stuff here. Let me play this clip for you.
Richard.
It was not Richard.
Was it? Oh, fuck. Didn't see that coming. It wasn't Richard.
No, would you like to know what it was?
Yeah.
Right, I'll let you try and answer first.
I'd say Jack.
I'd say Mohammed.
You're correct.
What? Right.
According to the CSO in 2022, the most popular boy's name in Galway was Mohammed.
Oh, yeah. I read that somewhere, yeah.
Okay. Wasn't expecting that, but okay.
Wow. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Right. That's interesting.
Do you want to know what it was?
Yeah, actually.
It was Mohammed.
Mohammed. Oh, my God, yeah, it was Mohammed. I knew that, actually.
Ah, fuck off. Wasn't Mohammed. In Galway. Mohammed.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to know what it was?
Yes, please.
It was Mohammed.
Okay.
Okay.
Look surprised.
Wow.
Really?
Elon Musk responded to this. True in most countries in Europe. Now, there is no longer a community note under Elon's tweet, but I saw it. And the community note said, it is not true. This tweet is misleading, and it doesn't even crack the top 10 in most countries. The funny thing is, I tweeted this. Actually, I don't quite have. Let me. I'll scroll down. I'll pull it up. I thought I had it pulled up. Let's grab it. The funny thing is, Elon Musk is actually correct. He is for the most part correct. And so I called out the community note, which contributed into it being removed. I said this community note can F off. The number 4 most popular name in Europe is Mohammed. The 4th most popular name, Lucas, Alexander, Oliver, Olivier, Mohammed. Now, I got to tell you, I don't care if your name is Mohammed. I don't care if you name your kids Mohammed. That's not the issue. The issue is that for people from, say, Galway, Ireland, which it's the most popular name, people like their histories and their stories, and they don't want to see them destroyed. That's just a reality, and people will fight to protect them. And you are going to, and they have a right to, and you're going to see this. What the far left and the media narrative tries to do is say it's about white people. No, not really. It's about culture and the things we like, the things we cherish. Let me tell you about something, my friends. I'm from Chicago. Nobody actually ever says Chicago, but for some reason people claim they do. Maybe they did 4 years ago. We say Chicago. And then everyone for some reason says Chicago. No, that's like a fake thing that nobody does. But anyway, I digress. I'm from Chicago. And in the lovely city, we get quite a bit of snow. And there is something that many people from the Midwest and from places with winter, it's not just Chicago, they know this. There is a feeling you get on Christmas. The Christmas tree is up. The Christmas lights are on it. The lights are dim, perhaps some candlelight. And it is snowing heavily. And you look out the window and you're sitting wearing your little Christmas sweater or whatever. and you're sipping hot cocoa. And this is not something that rich people experience. I was not quite rich growing up. In fact, quite poor, lower class. And but you'd sit on the couch looking out the window, dimly lit, maybe 5 p.m., watching the snow as night begins to fall. And it's a muffled silence. The car sounds are muffled from the snow. And there's a feeling you get. And, it's funny, I brought this up on Timcast IRL, and everybody knows it. Everybody from these areas knows it. Yeah, if you're from the American South or you're from somewhere with no snow, you don't. You don't know this feeling, but this feeling, it's something. It really is. And so recently, I saw on Instagram an AI-generated video which created the most intense version of this feeling. I would say it's akin to some kind of nostalgia, some kind of like feeling of home. It was an AI video of a cabin with a full 20-foot glass wall from the hilltop overlooking the town with heavy snow falling, a fireplace, and a TV playing cartoons. And there's a reason why this video had tens of thousands of likes and was being, algorithmically pushed on Instagram. Because people from areas with winter know that feeling. Here's my point. These feelings you get, and many of you know exactly the feeling I'm talking about, it feels good, and you never want to let it go, and you want it again and again. And when you're sitting in these moments, sipping a hot cocoa with a loved one, with the lights turned low and the muffled snow just during dusk in the winter, the clouds are out, so it's, very dim, but you can see outside and the lights of the city. You want to share that feeling. You want your children to know these feelings. Something truly fascinating. Now, I think this is why people say, I'm upset when I hear that Muhammad is the most popular name, because it's that thing you grew up with, that connection to your roots, to your history, that the feeling you get, it's going away. People are going to fight for that feeling. They're not going to let that go. But I'll tell you what causes this, and it's the lack of children. That really is what it is. When I talk to somebody, it is unsurprising. People without children likely to have leftist views. Fact. I'm not saying they all do. Many of you watching probably don't have children. I don't. Personal family stuff, working on it, but none of your business. And what I find is, when it comes to the issue of abortion, people who don't have kids don't care. People who have kids, pro-life. It's very interesting. People who don't have kids don't care that kids are reading smut in schools. People with kids freaking out. It's fascinating, isn't it? I talked to a friend and they're like, who cares if kids are reading these things? People should learn this stuff. And I'm like, you don't have kids. And they're like, no. I'm like, exactly. People with kids are like, I was terrified to see what my kid was reading. It's really what it's all about. Kids change a person. They make them want to preserve and protect. So what we're seeing in Europe, people aren't having as many kids. The politics is starting to change. But I wonder what will happen now with these riots. At a certain point, I'll go back to the point I made several years ago. A majority population is being attacked. In the United States, 65 to 70% of the population is white. And that's changing in many places. At a certain point, these people are going to think to themselves, we are being oppressed, but we're still the majority. And that's when something wild happens. Why is it happening now? In fact, perhaps the greatest gift to the white majority is the liberal left anti-white faction. Because here's what happens. It is true that white liberals are the only group of people with an out-group preference. So we've covered this years ago. Hispanics, black people, Asians, and white conservatives have a slight in-group preference for their own race. White liberals, out-group preference. You have, and this is a gift to the white right. And I'll explain. When white people are 70% majority and they're marching in lockstep with what they think and they want, but the American right doesn't protest or fight very hard, what do you see? You see the civil rights movement, you see the expansion of rights, and good for not white people. When a faction of white people in this country turn and become anti-white, what happens now is what is truly the racial majority starts to function as a minority because they have a large portion of white people actually opposed to white racial collectivism. In fact, opposed to whiteness in general, which is substantially worse. I would say the majority of white people in this country are very tolerant of other races and oppose racism, and that's why we end up with the civil rights movement and where we are today. When a faction of white people, the white liberals, start acting against white people, instead of being tolerant, you get conflict. Now, what is still the white majority is fractured and is now functioning as a minority because white liberals are acting against the interests of white collectivism. White collectivists then start protesting, and here's my point. If in the minority, you have a hard time winning political power, but white people are the majority, and the far left ideas opposing or critical of whiteness are the extreme minority, but they've made it into the mainstream. Why? Because they have support from other racial collectivist groups and identitarian factions. What will eventually happen is the default liberals who don't like being attacked for being white or criticized or killed start to side with the white collectivists, and you end up with quote unquote white rights. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it should happen. I'm saying it is an inevitability if all of these different groups are aligning themselves against someone just because they're white. When schools say whiteness is bad and whiteness is the problem, and the media and the universities are doing it, guess what? White people are going to internalize the attack on them based on their race, and then you get race-based conflict, which we may see in Europe right now. But we will see. We will see. It seems like this week it may still get pretty wild, and it is the winter, which is wild because usually riots they're not like common in the winter. But we'll see what happens next year. 2024 is going to be absolutely bonkers, and with more right-wing parties winning, nationalism winning, and even fairly left-leaning European individuals telling me outright, like, people are sick of the immigration, things may be due for a change. Disney is collapsing. Wokeness is failing. I think all in all, classical liberalism, nationalism, even the libertarians are embracing borders and pro-life. This is starting to win. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.